Imagine you are swimming on your back in the middle of the vast ocean, with not a single tree around, no compass, no GPS, and the nearest patch of land a full 500 kilometers away. Imagine you are swimming on your back in the middle of the vast ocean, surrounded by a full 500 kilometers of nothingness. Up until now, in old textbooks and the conventional thinking of the vast majority of people, the answer to how ancient humans appeared on isolated oceanic islands has always been attributed to two words: pure coincidence. People casually conjure up the scenario of some poor prehistoric guy walking on the beach when a super typhoon strikes, hurling him out to sea along with a rotten log. After days of delirium from thirst and hunger, the log drifts ashore on a tropical paradise island. And just like that, a deserted island becomes inhabited. However, under the lens of experimental archaeology and modern genetics, the scenario of these monkeys riding on drifting logs is mathematically an absurd joke. Because if you were just drifting aimlessly, the odds of surviving alone are already 1 in a million. But to sow the seeds of an entire civilization on a desolate island, you cannot go alone. You are forced to drift along with at least one person of the opposite sex, and both of you must be alive, healthy, and still capable of reproduction. And even more miraculously, you must bring along enough plant saplings and livestock so that you won't starve on a barren coral reef. If we consider this to be sheer random luck, that probability is even lower than winning the jackpot 10 times in a single day. The most devastating archaeological evidence that shatters this misconception is a deadly geographical barrier called the Wallace Line. This is a deep, abyssal ocean trench running along the Lombok Strait, located between the modern-day Indonesian islands of Bali and Lombok. Millions of years ago, as the Earth entered the Ice Age, water trapped in the polar ice caps caused global sea levels to plummet by more than 100 meters. At that time, the entire mainland Southeast Asia was connected into a massive landmass called the Sunda Shelf, while Australia and New Guinea formed the continent of Sahul. However, the Wallace Trench was so deep that even when sea levels dropped to record lows, it still formed a saltwater boundary hundreds of meters deep, completely separating Asian and Australian fauna. Tigers, elephants, monkeys, and rhinos from the west could never swim across this trench to reach the other side. Yet scientists were left utterly astounded when they discovered the remains of Homo floresiensis, also known as hobbit humans, on the island of Flores dating back nearly 1 million years. How did an ancient human species with a brain only the size of an orange end up on an isolated island tucked just behind the Wallace Line? If that wasn't enough, around 50,000 to 65,000 years ago, our Homo sapiens ancestors crossed a series of deep straits filled with fierce ocean currents to set foot on the continent of Sahul. Remember, no matter how low sea levels were back then, they still had to make at least 3 long-distance ocean voyages, including churning straits ranging from 30 to nearly 100 kilometers wide, where all traces of land completely vanished from the horizon. This proves a single undeniable truth: they did not just drift there by chance. Our ancestors intentionally built boats, organized sea voyages, and conquered the ocean long before humans knew about metals or writing. But how did they venture into such a vast expanse without turning the journey into a mass suicide? The answer lies in a remarkably cunning survival algorithm of the Lapita people, the ancestors of modern Polynesians. When looking at a map of the Pacific, researchers once fell into a baffling logical contradiction. Lapita originated from Southeast Asia and Taiwan, heading eastward to colonize thousands of islands scattered across the Pacific. Yet, their direction of movement was completely opposite to the direction of the trade wind-steady winds that always blow from east to west. Why would Stone Age people with primitive sailing canoes choose to hurl themselves against the wind into certain death? As it turns out, this was not blind recklessness, but a seafaring tactic called the insurance sail. Archaeology professor Jeff Irwin has pointed out that the Lapita deliberately chose to sail against the wind to find new islands. Think in terms of their survival logic when hoisting the sails to head against the wind into uncharted waters. If after weeks adrift they saw only boundless waves and their food supplies ran out, they only needed to perform one extremely simple action. That was to turn the boat around, lower the sails, or catch the trade winds. The familiar wind would automatically propel the boat, carrying them safely back to their exact homeland without expending a single ounce of effort. This tactic was essentially a magical undo button designed by hand long before humans even invented the compass. If you sailed with the wind for exploration, the journey would be very fast and effortless. But once you drifted too far without seeing land, you would forever be unable to return because the wind would always blow against your face. Conversely, choosing the arduous path of going against the wind meant that the wind itself served as an absolute lifeline for prehistoric voyagers. Not only that, but the Lapita people also possessed a terrifying, swarm-like patience. They watched for those brief windows when monsoon wind reversal weather events occurred, or the El Nino years when the trade winds weakened and temporarily shifted direction. They seized that golden opportunity to launch their canoes into the open sea at lightning speed. When the normal weather cycle returned, they already had the wind at their backs to guide their return journey. Clearly, our ancestors were not playing a game of chance with the ocean. They cracked the laws of nature, turning the vast ocean into a military puzzle with risks calculated meticulously down to the smallest detail. But no matter how brilliant their tactical mindset was, if the hardware, meaning the boat, sank upon hitting the third wave, every plan would essentially be thrown into the sea. An ordinary dugout canoe, no matter how skillfully carved, is only suited for shallow coastal waters or calm rivers and lakes. When faced with the roaring, sheer waves of the open sea, the narrow center of gravity of the round wooden hull will cause the boat to capsize in a matter of mere seconds. Solve this ruthless mechanical problem, our ancestors invented two Stone Age maritime architectural masterpieces, the Outrigger canoe, and at the pinnacle of achievement, the double hull canoe. By attaching a parallel wooden log to form an outrigger, or joining two dugout hulls together with a sturdy wooden deck in the middle, they multiplied the base of their center of gravity manifold. This principle is similar to attaching training wheels to a bicycle or building modern catamaran ships today. The double-hulled canoe no longer rocked unsteadily with every wave, but glided along with miraculous stability, creating a space spacious enough to carry an entire family, livestock, and countless supplies. Furthermore, what helped this double-hulled canoe slice through the wind and surge forward was its radically unique crab claw sail. Instead of using flat, rectangular sails like Western fleets in the Middle Ages, ancient people carved and curved two wooden poles to stretch a mat woven from screw pine leaves into the shape of a crab claw. Through the lens of modern aerodynamics, marine engineers were left in sheer amazement when testing this model in a wind tunnel. The crab claw sail generates a vertical lift similar to an airplane wing, allowing the boat to catch extremely weak swirling gusts and funnel them into maximum propulsion. Thanks to this, the heavily loaded boat weighing tons could still glide at a surprising speed without any fear of tearing the sail. However, having a powerful engine alone is still not enough to conquer the open sea. You can rig and sail a boat very quickly, but if the crew starves to death or collapses from illness midway, the journey is essentially a failure. How can they sustain the lives of dozens of people, along with dogs, pigs, and chickens, on a mobile station in the middle of a sun-scorched, saltwater ocean for weeks on end? The answer lies in an extremely profound prehistoric food biochemistry. Ancient people invented techniques to preserve food without needing a single refrigerator. Fish harvested from the sea were filleted, salted, and dried under the harsh sun until all the moisture was drawn out, preventing decomposing bacteria from growing. Starchy tubers such as taro and arrowroot were baked, finely pounded, and dried into a high-energy compressed powder. But their most powerful and formidable secret weapon was fermented sake. They dug deep pits in the ground, arranged ripe breadfruit inside, and covered them tightly with banana leaves to trigger anaerobic fermentation. Thanks to lactic acid bacteria, the breadfruit transformed into a dense, sour dough that could be stored for years without spoiling. When setting out to sea, they wrapped these blocks of dough in dry banana leaves to bring along. This fermented breadfruit not only provided an abundant amount of calories, but was also extremely rich in vitamin C. It was this strange, sour food that saved the entire prehistoric crew from scurvy, the health-destroying nightmare that would claim the lives of millions of European sailors in the age of exploration thousands of years later. In essence, every double-hulled canoe of that era was no different from a miniature space station, fully self-sufficient with energy sources and life support systems for a mobile community. But let us ask a more difficult question, no matter how advanced your boat is, or how abundant your food supplies may be. If you step out into the middle of an ocean where all you see in every direction is an endless expanse of blue, with no coordinate markers, no maps or compass, how do you know where you are going? Are you just going to close your eyes, cross your arms, and leave it all to fate? That is when our ancestors activated what seemed like a supernatural ability, biosensory navigation, also known as wayfinding. Without any metal tools, ancient master navigators turned their very bodies into biological computers, capable of reading and processing millions of data points from the natural environment. The first almost magical skill is the ability to read ocean swells. The ocean is never still, it always moves in rhythmic undertows that stretch for thousands of kilometers. When this undercurrent collides with a hidden island lying beyond the horizon, it is deflected back or distorted, creating extremely complex interference wave patterns. Ancient master captains simply had to lie flat against the boat's deck, or even submerge sensitive parts of their bodies into the salty water, to feel the slightest change in the vibrational rhythm. Through experience accumulated over generations, They could distinguish between wind-generated waves and reflected waves from an island dozens of kilometers away that was still invisible to the naked eye. If the ocean waves acted as an underwater radar, the sky provided them with other brilliant navigational signals. The ancients paid special attention to the habits of seabirds such as terns and cormorants. These birds never sleep at night on the open sea. In the morning, they fly out to sea to search for food, and at dusk, they must fly back to their nests on the mainland. Seeing birds fly out at dawn, you know the island is behind you. Seeing birds hurrying back at sunset, if you steer your boat straight in the direction they are flying, you are sure to find land. They even spotted land through the clouds. When the sunlight reflects from the shallow, turquoise saltwater lagoons inside the coral reefs, this beam of light is cast upward onto the base of cumulus clouds floating high above, creating a distinctly pale greenish blur. Just by spotting a cloud with that strange green belly on the horizon, the captain knew immediately that beneath it lay a paradise island waiting for them. At night, when darkness covers everything and all traces of the clouds vanish, the night sky becomes a giant star map deeply engraved in their memory. They know the rising and setting positions of hundreds of stars by heart, turning the Milky Way into a cosmic compass that shifts with the seasons. And perhaps most magical of all is the phenomenon that the Polynesians call Te Lapa, meaning flashing currents of light emanating from the ocean depths. This is actually the bioluminescence of plankton stimulated by waves rebounding from land. Viewed from a boat on moonless nights, these glittering streaks of light, like underwater lightning, always radiate outward from uninhabited islands toward the open sea. By connecting these Te Lapa light trails, they have a natural pathway of light pointing straight to their destination. All the senses of these prehistoric people were honed to absolute mastery, turning them into beings at one with the ocean. Yet, at this point, you guys are surely bound to have a huge question. Equipped with advanced double-hulled canoes, top-tier food preservation techniques, and navigation superpowers like biological computer sweat on Earth, drove them to board boats and launch out into the vast open sea. Living peacefully on land, eating well and sleeping soundly wasn't that much better than risking their lives and their wives and children to gamble with the sea god. In reality, the motivation that pushed them away from familiar sandy shores had no romantic coloring whatsoever. It all came from the relentless pressure of the laws of survival, population explosion, and wars over resources. Imagine a coral reef or a small island out in the ocean that could only sustain a maximum of a few hundred people. And fresh water sources dried up, and the coconut groves and taro patches were no longer enough to share. Social conflicts would erupt into bloody massacres among the tribes. What's more, prehistoric Polynesian society operated under a harsh custom known as primogeniture. All the agricultural land, water sources, and power on the island belonged exclusively to the eldest son of the family. The younger sons, born after him, were left with absolutely nothing. They faced two grim choices. One was to stay and serve as mere servants, living patiently under the shadow of their older brother. The other was to build a double-hulled canoe themselves, rally a crew of disgruntled young men, persuade a few young women along with some pigs, chickens, and plant cuttings, and venture out to sea in search of a new island. In that place, the once destitute younger son would become a chief, founding a new lineage that would rule over an entire domain. It was precisely this desire to change their destiny, and this pressure for survival that transformed the ocean from a terrifying graveyard into their only escape route. Yet, Polynesian maritime history contains a mysterious gap that has driven archaeologists crazy for decades, known as the 500-year blackout. After successfully conquering islands such as Tonga and Samoa around 1100 BCE, the Lapita ancestors suddenly stopped. They went no further. They settled down and lived there for over a millennium and a half without launching a single additional canoe out into the open sea. Why did these people, who once considered the ocean their home, suddenly shut down for so long? The answer lies in two factors: a hardware upgrade and the rhythm of the climate. During that 500-year intermission, they realized the distance to the islands ahead was no longer just a few hundred kilometers, but thousands of kilometers of deep, fathomless sea. Single outrigger canoes could no longer handle this voyage. They needed time to perfect the technology of larger double-hulled waka canoes and to weave crab claw sails that could withstand violent storms. At the same time, they had to patiently wait for the El Nino climate cycles to appear. Normally, the trade winds blew very strongly from east to west, preventing them from heading east. But when the El Nino phenomenon peaked, these trade winds weakened or even reversed completely into westerly winds. Seizing this once-in-a-millennium climatic window, the second Polynesian expansion burst forth fiercely around 700 to 1,000 AD. From Samoa, they shot out like arrows across the three corners of the Polynesian triangle, setting foot on Hawaii to the north, Easter Island to the east, and Aotearoa known today as New Zealand to the south. So, did they stop at Easter Island? The answer is absolutely not. These masters of the ocean achieved yet another feat that left Western historians completely astounded. It continued to set sail for thousands of kilometers more to ram straight into the coast of South America. The evidence reinforcing this visit is none other than the sweet potato, a crop strictly native to the Andes mountain region of South America. When European navigators first set foot on the remote islands of Polynesia, they were surprised to find that the indigenous people had been cultivating vast fields of sweet potatoes for a long time. Even more daringly, in the Maori and other Polynesian languages, the sweet potato is called kumara or umala. This word is identical to kuma or kumara in the Quechua